A home for the lost. James Weston was a hard-working man who lived in the quiet village of Oak Ridge. He had a loving wife, Rose, and together they had 2 sons, Daniel and Thomas. Their home was filled with warmth and laughter, but life had its hardships. One day Rose fell ill. Her condition worsened, and despite all efforts, she passed away, leaving James and the 2 boys heartbroken. James struggled to care for Daniel and Thomas on his own. After some time, he remarried, hoping to bring stability to his household. His new wife, Margaret, came from a nearby town, and soon they had 2 little daughters of their own, Annie and Lily. At first, it seemed like they could be a happy family, but Margaret never truly accepted Daniel and Thomas as her own. The boys were treated as nothing more than burdens. Margaret refused to feed them, pushing all the house chores onto their small shoulders. They scrubbed floors, washed clothes, and tended to the animals while she fed her daughters the best of what little they had. Their father, unaware of the cruelty behind his back, spent his days trying to provide for his family. Then, tragedy struck again. Smallpox spread through town, and James was among its victims. Within days, he was gone. His absence left a void that Margaret quickly filled with anger. With no man to provide, she saw the boys as obstacles, mouths to feed with money she wished to keep for herself. "You want to eat? Find your own food," she spat one night, hurling a stale piece of bread at them. The boys knew they could not survive like this. Hunger clawed at their stomachs, and their stepmother's cruelty grew by the day. One night, when the house was quiet and Margaret was asleep, Daniel whispered, "We have to go. If we stay, we'll die." Hand in hand, the brothers fled into the night, their feet carrying them as far as their tired bodies could go. The wind was cold, but not as cold as the hunger that gnawed at them. They walked until dawn, reaching a small village where they collapsed by the side of a dusty road, too weak to go any farther. A shadow fell over them. "Boys, are you all right?" A man with kind eyes and calloused hands knelt beside them. His name was Samuel, a farmer who barely made enough to survive. But when he looked at the 2 starving children, he saw something familiar, a desperation he once knew himself. Without hesitation, he lifted them up. "Come," he said, "you need food." Samuel took them home, where his wife Anne and their little daughter, Lily, welcomed them with open arms. The boys ate their first real meal in days, their eyes filling with tears at the warmth of it all. After hearing their story, Samuel turned to his wife. "We have so little, but they have nothing. Let them stay." And so, the boys became part of their family. They learned to farm, to care for animals, and to laugh again. Samuel, with his meager earnings, sent all 3 children to school, determined to give them a better future. Years passed, and the boys grew into strong young men. They worked the land, tending to the farm as Samuel aged. Daniel, the elder, chose to stay and run the farm, while Thomas, eager to help beyond the fields, took a job at the town's chief's office. One day, duty called Thomas to a neighboring village. As he rode through the streets, a familiar sight made him pull his horse to a stop. His old home. Curiosity and something deeper, an ache he couldn't name, pushed him forward. He knocked on the worn wooden door. It creaked open, revealing a thin, frail woman. His stepmother. She barely recognized him. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice weak, her face sunken with hardship. "Thomas," he said, "your stepson." Her eyes widened, but before she could speak, 2 small girls peeked from behind her. His stepsisters. They were thin, their clothes ragged, their faces hollow with hunger. The sight sent a sharp pain through Thomas's chest. Margaret, once proud and cruel, was now broken. She told him of her second husband, a man who had promised security, but had stolen all she had and disappeared into the night. She had nothing left, no money, no food, no way to send her daughters to school. Thomas clenched his fists, remembering the nights he and Daniel had starved under her roof. But something deeper than anger stirred within him. Pity, compassion. He pressed a few coins into her palm. "I'll be back," he promised, before riding home. That night, he told Daniel everything. They sat in silence for a long time before Daniel finally spoke. "We can't leave them like this. No one deserves to starve." So they returned, not with resentment, but with an offer. "Come with us," Daniel said. "We'll help you." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She had once turned them away, left them to suffer, yet here they stood, offering her salvation. Shame burned through her, but so did gratitude. She nodded. The brothers rented a modest home for them in the village, close enough to keep watch. They provided food, medicine, and most importantly, education for their stepsisters. Margaret, once filled with bitterness, now watched as the boys she had once mistreated became her saviors. She had spent years blaming the world for her misfortunes, but now she saw kindness where she had once sown cruelty. She wept one evening, looking at her daughters studying by candlelight. "I don't deserve this," she whispered to Daniel and Thomas, "not after what I did to you." Daniel smiled. Everyone deserves a second chance. And so the two families, once divided by resentment and hardship, became one. The brothers, who had once been cast aside, had built something greater than revenge. They had built a home, not just for themselves, but for those who had once wronged them. And in that, they found a happiness neither had ever imagined. Their past was filled with pain, but their future was filled with hope. And that's the end of the story. Hope you learned something new. Thanks for watching.